Over 2,000 years ago, two disillusioned disciples walked along a dusty road to Emmaus. They had just witnessed Jesus, their friend and leader, whom they hoped to be the Messiah, suffer a gruesome death by crucifixion. Doubt, fear, and uncertainty clouded their conversation as they journeyed home, questioning the future. Until something miraculous happened. The risen Jesus appeared and answered their questions. Today, many young Catholics step onto college campuses with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed of faith given to them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, scheduled to be released in the summer of 2021, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. To pre-order your copy and help spread the word about the book, visit patchworkheart.org. Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network present Hear Your Faith, a brand new audio subscription service that features a growing collection of uplifting Catholic audio choruses, talks, and other exclusive content to help you grow deeper in your faith and knowledge of Catholicism. Subscribe today at patreon.com/patchworkheartministry. The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. My name is DeSantis. I'm the director, and you can learn about us on our website at nonnatus.org. And this is our 10 Commandments series with the president of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, Mickey Kelly. We've already done 3 episodes, and this is the last one. It's a 4-part series. And first, let me welcome my co-host here. Welcome, Mickey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And it's also been a pleasure to have this series where we can unpack the 10 Commandments and really talk about what they mean to us as Catholics. And of course, this is our Families in Crisis podcast. And we will do a focus on that particular aspect of the 10 Commandments as it affects families and individuals, and especially people who are in crisis. So this podcast, we will be doing Commandments number 6, 9, and 10. And let me read what those commandments are, just so we have them in front of us. So the first one is, thou shalt not commit adultery. That's number 6. Number 9 is, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. And then our last commandment, number 10, is, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. So let's start out then with talking about what the 6th commandment really means. And I'm reading something here from, it's actually from Catholicism for Dummies, but there's some good things here. It says, the 6th and 9 commandments honor human sexuality. This commandment forbids the actual physical act of having immoral sexual activity, specifically adultery, which is sex with someone else's spouse or a spouse cheating on their partner. This commandment also includes fornication, which is sex between unmarried people, prostitution, pornography, homosexual activity, masturbation, group sex, rape, incest, pedophilia, bestiality, and necrophilia. So let's talk about it, Mickey.
Yeah, well, fornication, I think it's been, I'm waiting to hear every single priest, mention something about this from the pulpit every given Sunday. I mean, let's face it, like, you hear about the sex scandals that well, the fornication thing, like, you hear about that from the Clinton administration. It happened like towards the end of his second term that came to light when he, had affairs with his interns. And there were even some people of power that have been guilty of this, and most of it have come to light, such as, whether it's politics or even the entertainment industry too. You hear about Harvey Weinstein. He's in fact, I think he's going through, like, I know he's been guilty of some charges recently and all that. So you look at Bill Cosby. If you want to look a little local too, he's been guilty of this commandment himself, with all things considered. And it's really sad that, like, you know we live in a culture where people say, oh, it's okay that, like, you can, it makes you awesome to be someone that can have sex with like multiple people. But the reality is you're breaking the natural law, which was written by God.
Yeah, very good point. And what we're going to do during this podcast is reflect a lot on the Catechism of the Catholic Church and, of course, Holy Scripture. But you're right; it's written in natural law too, and that's a really good point to look at. So even though this podcast, we're the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, we are a Catholic nonprofit, but some of what we're talking about really is for just about anybody. I mean, and especially this one, I think this is the number 6 commandment, and I'm reading here from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Part 3, Life in Christ, Section 2. It says in Article 6 that you shall not commit adultery. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And it goes on to say in Article 2331 in the Catechism that God is love, and in himself he lives a mystery of personal loving communion, creating the human race in his own image. God inscribed in the humanity of man and woman the vocation, and thus the capacity and responsibility of love and communion. God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. He blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. So I think there's a lot to think about there when we look at Scripture, how God created Eve to be the partner and to be the life partner. And even though obviously sin came into the picture, God had a good design, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he had a very good design. And what God has instilled in this institution of holy matrimony is for our own good, in the building of family life, in the building of real relationships, in the building of worldwide community. And so even though we might look at this commandment as something as a lot, a hard and fast rule, it's a hard and fast rule for our own sakes, because it's more than just how can I say this the right way? Well, first of all, it's not just about us, right? It affects the whole world when we sin. It affects our families, our communities, and it affects our very selves and our salvation, right?
Mhm.
So the Catechism also goes on to say that sexuality affects all aspects of the human person in the unity of his body and soul. It especially concerns affectivity, the capacity to love and to procreate, and in more general way, the aptitude for forming bonds of communion with others. Anything to say on that one, Mickey? Because I do think that the Catechism does have such wisdom.
It has, of course. And like, like with the sixth commandment, we kind of see it around. It's like, the way I see it is like the sixth commandment, it's like, oh, you can't have, you have to stay faithful to your spouse, of course. But it goes deeper. So things like, homosexuality was on the list, of course. There's a reason why marriage will forever be between one man and one woman. And of course, like when every time I hear like people say, "Oh, it's so love is love," when they try to make the argument about, same-sex couples, when in reality, I consider that perversion. And it's not love to me, it's perversion. And the fact that, you want to tell young kids it's okay to do this, then which is not right at all. But we've got but to back up here, when you get married, there's three of you getting married, as Fulton Sheen reminds us. And it's not just the man and the woman. There's also a third person, and that is you're marrying yourselves to God. And you promise to be with him you be with each other from death to you do you part. And I mean, of course, I'm sure you want to explain more about it yourself, and as a married woman for a little over 30 years, I
That's
know.
right.
Of course, I mean, you and
Yeah.
Angela, of course, I know your marriage wasn't perfect. I know you and I had um, off the air discussions, but you had challenges, but of course you were able to go through it. And the one thing that really stands out to many of the marriages that are ending in divorce today is you have God as your compass. In fact, I was reading an article recently that I think there's a I think it's Croatia. They have a very low divorce rate, all because they have the spouses. It's somewhere in Europe. I'm sure it's Croatia, but I think that they have a ritual where they bless the priest would bless the married couple with a crucifix. And ever since that ritual was initiated, the divorce rate was very low
Mm,
in
wow.
that. I think it might be
That's
just one
amazing.
particular town in that country, but I'm like thinking, hey, we gotta get the whole world on this one.
Yeah, I mean, and to back up a little bit because on this podcast we usually don't get too personal, but I will get a little personal here because I have been married for a long, long time, and the one thing that I've learned is that love is stronger than anything else. And so even if you have disagreements, even if you go through tough times in your marriage, and I do think that everybody does, but you have to make the decision to hang on tight, right? And if you need help, get it. If you need some help, get it somehow, whether it be through the church, whether it be through counseling, whether it be just through, maybe there's some friends or family members sometimes they can kind of help out if you're going through some kind of a difficult time, whether it's related to job loss or addictions, whatever it is. I mean, there's all kinds of things that influence family life, right?
Hmm.
So what I would say, my own personal experience is that love is our greatest gift, and the gift of marriage really is the giving of ourselves to God and through to that other person and to the family. So yeah, admittedly, I've had challenges in my marriage, but I'm happy to say that God has really blessed us. He might even be listening right now, so I have to say hi.
There's your shout out, Angelo.
That's right. Mickey knows my family well, and Mickey's a blessing to both of us, our family. When you're working in a nonprofit, the blessing of working with the people who you're doing the ministry with is also a blessing to your family and to your marriage too. So Mickey, I thank you for that.
Thank
I want to talk about chastity too, because chastity, now this is from the Catechism 2337. It's the vocation to chastity. It means the successful integration of sexuality within the person and thus the inner unity of man in his bodily and spiritual being. Sexuality in which man's belonging to the bodily and biological world is expressed becomes personal and truly human when it is integrated into the relationship of one person to another in the complete and lifelong mutual gift of a man and a woman. The virtue of chastity, therefore, involves the integrity of the person and the integrality of the gift. I'll stop there. There's a lot more to unpack. I do want to back up again. You had talked about unchastity when it comes to relationships outside of the marriage. Okay. And I'm not even going to get into all the different dynamics there, because we can imagine that there's many dynamics, right? Whether they're opposite sex, same sex, whoever it is. But when it comes right down to it, the church's teaching is that the sexual act between man and woman is meant for one place, right? So
For
that's
sure.
what it comes down to. We could talk about all different things and people's rights to express themselves and all of that. But when it comes down to it, Catholic teaching really, it's the integrity of that gift between the man and a woman, because of what what is the outcome of that love, right? The outcome of that love is the creation of a new human being. And we know that sometimes couples can be married and they suffer from infertility. So even if a child isn't born from their marriage, the integrity of that relationship, because a lot of, not only, a lot of there's a lot of births in our lives, and it isn't always just the birth of a human being, right? So even if a couple is infertile for whatever reason that is, there's the births of the charity that they do within that relationship to the world, to others, to friends, to family. So they could be a spiritual mother and father, right, Mickey? I mean, that's a whole other thing
For sure.
that we
And you
can
know what?
discuss.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Dan, I I kind of think like you may not realize this, but I was having a discussion with my mom one time that when it comes to like, Mother's Father's Day, and of course by the time but probably by the time this would air, maybe it would be at least it may be between Mother's and Father's Day, but it's like it's one way that have it once a year. But the fact is, those two holidays they should be celebrated year round. And the reason I say that is because moms and dads are the good moms and dads that are out there, and I'm sure there are many. They're doing everything they can. They're busting tail, to help to support their children, let alone the fact that they are doing everything they can, to set a good example for them, and then that would plant the seeds for what the kind of marriage, the kind of husband or wife they want when they are called, if God, God willing, they are called to the vocation of holy matrimony. And another thing and the one thing you also brought up is, with the virtue of chastity is it's like something that like chastity is not just like about marriage, but it's also like is also a part of like it's for everyone.
Yes.
Priest and religious, they have to take a vow of chastity, and let alone the fact there's a rise of consecrated virgins. As a matter of fact, there is one in Philadelphia that I'm aware of that I think there may be another one coming, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But hey, like there's women that probably thought they were called to the religious life. They probably thought they were called to marriage, but then they thought they went a little deeper to the call, and God was like calling them, to be a consecrated virgin, and that is a vocation, no question that that could be that could be an improved vocation by the Catholic Church, down the road, unless it already has. But what do I know?
Yeah, no, that's a
The
great point. Great points.
For sure. For sure. I think also another point too, like I'll back up a little bit with the chastity thing. I'll be honest, this was something I kind of struggled like early in my young adulthood, and I'll be a little vulnerable with this one. And it's like I didn't like get in too deep with the whole hookup thing. Like I might have done it a couple of times. Then I just felt like, what the heck? And of course I had to, get out of it sooner or later. It's almost like I kind of think of it as you're trying to swim away from danger, like in a deep ocean. Like you're trying to swim to like a raft or a boat or something. Let's say there's sharks coming after you. Like you want to swim as fast as you can to that boat. Otherwise, you like they'll otherwise they will pull you down and like eat you for breakfast, so to speak.
That's right. And thank you for being vulnerable about it, because, you're a younger person who's living in this current age. And it's even different compared to when I was younger. I mean, I'm 56, so I'm probably more of a child of the 80s. And I'm not saying that back then there wasn't sin, right? There was sin back then too. And there was also the whole, probably was somewhat of that hookup culture too. But I think back then, it's the one element that makes things much different now is the technology plays a big part too. And back then, I don't think
Yeah,
that didn't
yeah.
play a
As a matter of
part.
fact, and with the whole thing with the dating thing, like it's one thing that you have you have, with like the advancement in technology, you also have to keep in mind too that there, chastity still has to be in play, especially with how you approach people. Because let's face it, like there is a dichotomy when it comes to when you interact with someone online. Like you may send them a message and they may take it the wrong way.
That's right.
Especially like you have to be extra careful. Like there are times like I have to look at something before I send and be like, does this look right? Does this sound right? And I'm just like,
Good. That's
I don't
great
think
to
I'm gonna do
hear
it.
that you do that. And I think that's great advice for people listening, that we do have to be careful with that, because with social media and with technology in general, you don't have that the whole idea of what would you say if you were standing in front of somebody, or even if you were on the phone, right? You wouldn't even say it if you were on the phone, but yet in a text or in a message or something, people sometimes say things that just don't sound right, like you said. So it's good for examination of conscience, I think. Let me just read a little bit more, if I could, about chastity from the Catechism.
Sure.
From 2339, it says that chastity includes an apprenticeship in self mastery, which is a training in human freedom. The alternative is clear: either man governs his passions and finds peace, or he lets himself be dominated by them and becomes unhappy. Man's dignity, therefore, requires him to act out of conscious and free choice, as moved and drawn in a personal way from within, and not by blind impulses in himself or by mere external constraint. Man gains such dignity when, ridding himself of all the slavery to passions, he presses forward to his goal by freely choosing what is good, and by his diligence and skill effectively secures for himself the means suited to this end. I think that's good when you think about the whole idea of self mastery.
Mhm.
And it might sound like a negative connotation, but really it is not.
Right. Yeah, as a matter of fact, and like I remember hearing from a priest that there are a couple things that are somewhat self-mastery, and of course I also would like to say self-discipline, because I think they're like I kind of think self-mastery and self-discipline are like they're kind of like they're kind of like a twins, so to speak, like the good twins. I say that because like you have to learn to govern like yourself over unruly passions, which is one of the intercessions in the St. Michael Rosary. It's called the Chaplet of St. Michael. You have to ask for his intercession to govern your unruly passions, like, keep them in check. And then with the self-discipline, like there are things you have to develop, such as, you know, channeling out all the distractions in the world. Say if you were trying to
Yes.
make time for silent prayer, let's say for adoration. And believe me, it's still a work in progress for many people, including myself. Like you have to, like I oftentimes I would have to shut my cell phone off if I was going to be if I was going to make a holy hour every week. So that way I'm not like, distracted. I'm not like tempted to like, surf around the apps or anything, like what's going on or whatever. I might just send like a picture saying like, oh, I'm at adoration, praying for everybody, but that's it. But then after that, it's like, you're all in to to keep a watch for an hour. It's like we were reminded during the Passion Gospel where Jesus goes to Gethsemane and he prays for like an hour, and then he goes and finds his apostles sleeping. It was like, can you not watch for 1 hour? And let's face it, there are people out there, let's face it, some of us don't know how we can master a full hour of adoration.
Right.
In
Right.
fact, well, if you're struggling, just start out with like 15 minutes, like this day, the next day, and until you get to like an hour. And then after you do the 15 a day, maybe push for 30. And then after you do 30, push for a 45. And then after you push for 45, you got the full hour right there after you develop that self-mastery.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up Eucharistic adoration because, this podcast is for families who are in crisis. And I can't think of a better way that if you're in a crisis of some sort, and if it has to do with these topics that we're talking about, having to do with human sexuality in your marriage, in your family, in some way, when you go to the Lord and you spend that time in prayer, it's a way to be able to be accompanied by God and be able to be with the Lord and listen to him. And he will console you in your troubles. So thank you. I thought we could, if Mickey, I thought we could go on to the next one, which is the
Mhm.
ninth commandment. That's you shall, excuse me, you shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife or his manservant or his maidservant or his ox or his ass or anything that is your neighbor's. And I'm reading right from the catechism here. Everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Any comments on the ninth commandment?
Well, lust, last time I checked, is a capital sin in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like, of course, pornography is really, like we were talking a moment ago about chastity. Pornography is like really a really big epidemic in our country. We may not even realize it because also, because pornography will, like, you look at a woman as an object instead of them as a human person, and that's not love. I call it lust.
Yes.
And of course, St. Paul really lays it out in his letter to Corinthians what love is. And 5 to 7 times or more, St. Paul says, love is this, love is that. And then in the end, he says, love is not this, love is not that. Well, let's face it. I mean, if you listen to some of the love songs that have been coming out, let's say from the 50s well into today, I would guarantee you 99% of the songs miss the mark one way or another. Now,
Mm-hmm.
let's face it, and like you and I grew up with like different music,
Yes.
different like music stardoms. You had like, well, of course, you had the Motown groups, and of course, you had like some of the legends of classic rock that were there. You go from American Bandstand to arenas, like for football or whatever it is. And you look at today, you had the people that like, they release these raunchy song, like those songs with raunchy lyrics that promote sexual promiscuity. And that really has, I honestly think, has been a big culprit in the way that we kind of look at women. And I'm not letting the men off the hook on this one either, because I'm sure there's been the same case too with women looking at men different ways, like saying like I mean, as a matter of fact, I used to get Sports Illustrated for a while, and then once they started having these um like women that are in like bathing suits, I was like, oh, this is the last straw for me. Forget it. I just stopped it. In fact, most of us had to write letters to, the people in charge of Sports Illustrated. Why would you do that? I mean, I would much rather read about the success of, Baylor University winning their first title in March Madness, the NCAA title for, I don't know for how many, maybe it's their first, I don't know. But anyway.
It's some really good points because it all starts in our heart, right? And
Mhm.
I commend you also what you just said about Sports Illustrated because there's some people who wouldn't think to even write to them or say anything about it. So
Right.
I
And
think
there's
that's
no question that maybe they're still releasing those like swimsuit editions when, it's just like, I was like thinking to myself, I mean, I know like some really good friends that are involved like in the modesty, like I guess they're starting like a modesty trend because like
mm,
I follow them like on Instagram, and I think if the March for Life would have happened back in January, most of them were going to consider like dressing like in their best like modest clothes and like having like a banner or something, and I think they were gonna like rock like 40s vintage outfits and everything, like the classic, like kind of the classic apparel use, like you remember from like the movies set in the 40s and 30s and all that.
Yes.
I was go for it. I love the I love the style too. So
Now, do you have a website or anything that you can tell our audience about in case they're interested in that?
truthfully, I do not, Anne, but
Okay.
I would definitely encourage just look up anyone who is like dressing like modest dress or anything. However, we could put it on our personal pages like after the fact or whatever, so
Yeah. Thank you,
um
Mickey.
but I like I said, I think it's important that it's not just how chastity is not just how you act, but it's also how you present yourself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like I kind of think of it as like a two, like you rarely see it. It's a two-way street. Like, you have traffic that goes south, and then you have traffic going north, of course, east and west. But let's face it, like if chastity had a street, I will guarantee you one side would be you're like you're on the chastity street driving your way to, making sure driving your way to perfecting your chaste actions, while at the same time you're driving the opposite direction for your chaste presentations.
Yeah, there's so much to really unpack and think about when it comes to chastity, when it comes to this ninth commandment. And I just want to read a little bit from the Catechism again. Now, this is on the ninth commandment. It says that St. John distinguishes three kinds of covetousness or concupiscence: the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. In the Catholic catechetical tradition, the ninth commandment forbids carnal concupiscence. The 10th forbids coveting another's goods. So, a lot to think about there. And I think I like the fact that you're bringing up to that when we dress ourselves, right? When we're clothing ourselves, we think about that we're not the only ones looking at ourselves, right? I mean, so it's got to be, some people want to keep up with style and they'll say, well, this isn't style. But if that style isn't modest, then it's really no good.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. Yeah, actually, and I remember like there are times like I go past these like sex shops like downtown, and I'm just like, and of course they have the mannequins that like have like they're showing like the flesh and everything. I'm just like, oh my gosh, really? You expect me to buy all this?
Yeah, and it's sad that as we go through our day, they say, and I don't know how, I don't have this statistic in front of me, but there's a lot of images that come before our eyes, even without us trying, as we're on the internet, as we are, going through our day. And even without us trying, there's advertisements that are so suggestive and improper, really. And so that's where this whole idea of the purification of the heart is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And the Catechism goes on to say in 2517, the heart is the seat of moral personality. Out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, fornication. The struggle against carnal covetousness entails purifying the heart and practicing temperance, remaining simple and innocent, and you will be like little children who do not know the evil that destroys man's life. Something to think about too, because temperance, sometimes people think of temperance only when it comes to things like food, right? But it also has to do with this commandment of the ninth one, the purification of the heart. And what Jesus teaches us about, as I just read, the simple and innocent, like little children. I'm not saying that we need to act and behave like little children, right? But the pureness of our hearts has to do with the accepting the chastity, right? And not being too curious either. Don't you think that's another part of it too? that curiosity that sometimes people have that leads them into sin.
Right, because I remember hearing stories of how some had like started like their porn addiction at say at least 12 years old. So then some were some alarming stories I remember hearing was maybe a little less than that, and but I was just like thinking to myself, hey, let's face it, men, the majority of men, they have struggled with porn addiction as young as like maybe between 10 to 12 years old. And you look at it, and when you do get hooked, it does take a toll on your relationships. And of course, your professional development. And of course, it's like I consider as a domino effect. If you're addicted to porn, one domino falls and then everything else just falls down. And of course, you fall down with it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it all kind of, all of this chastity, modesty, purity of heart, it all ties together very nicely. And I read a little bit more from the Catechism 2521. It says that purity requires modesty, an integral part of temperance. Modesty protects the intimate center of the person. It means refusing to unveil which should remain hidden. It is ordered to chastity, to whose sensitivity it bears witness. It guides how one looks at others and behaves toward them in conformity with the dignity of persons and their solidarity. It's what you just said, even about people who do get like addicted to porn and things like that. And that whole idea of staying close to the Lord during those times when people get tempted. I didn't know if you had anything to say about that, about the temptation part of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you are. I mean, let's face it. I mean, most of the sins and of course addictions that happen, it's like temptation. Like, it could be, you may think you're curious, but then it's like, you go to then you try it, and of course, you're hooked on it for life.
Yeah. Well,
Unless you seek some kind of help.
That's right. And I was just going to say that. Now, here we are, the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. And part of what we do is, as I keep saying, helping families in crisis through spiritual accompaniment. And I will also add pastoral accompaniment, because what we offer for anybody who's listening is a free spiritual consultation with our spiritual moderator. His name is Father Ken Breen. So just reach out on our website at nonnatus.org. And you can have a free appointment with Father. And I will say as many appointments as needed too. I have to mention the fact that we are not licensed psychotherapists or counselors. We do deal with the spiritual end, the pastoral end of it. But we also have a beautiful and wonderful page on our website for outside resources. It's under the helpful resources page on the website, and it's called Outside Resources. And if you look there, there are some links that we have having to do with porn addiction. So if you're listening to this, someone, or maybe even you yourself, get some help. Check out some of these great resources. Some of it is spiritual and some of it is psychological, but they all tie together, I think. Don't you, Mickey? I mean, they tie together. So you want to get help in both areas.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely. Now, as we're about, 3/4 of the way through this podcast, we're at the last commandment now. We're at number 10. And that one is that you shall not covet anything that is your neighbor's. You shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, maidservant, or his ox or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So let's unpack this one, Mickey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of it as like when I think about this commandment, it basically we talk about capital sins, and envy is the one that I really think of. You'd be like, you walk around and be like, oh man, I want that car that he has, or you'd be like, oh man, I want that life that you have, versus the things around those lines.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
every time I think of this commandment, it'd be like, like envy is the killer of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And you may think like, oh man, I want to have like, like with that person's job or that lifestyle, but in reality, it may make you fall flat on your face.
Yeah. And I think this all ties together too with accepting God's will in your own life, right? Because sometimes we can look over the other side of the fence where you think the grass is greener, but that person has a whole other life, personality, circumstances. And we may not really want all of that. If you really unpacked it and thought about it, you know, God made every single human being special with all of their gifts and talents. And
And let's face
Mhm,
it too, and like, we're all not meant to be the same, we're all meant to stand out.
mhm. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's talk a little more about this one. I would like to read again from the Catechism. 2534 says that the 10th commandment unfolds and completes the ninth, which is concerned with a concupiscence of the flesh. It forbids coveting the goods of another as the root of theft, robbery, and fraud, which is the seventh commandment, forbids lust of the eyes, leads to the violence and injustice forbidden by the fifth commandment. Avarice, like fornication, originates in the idolatry prohibited by the first three prescribed of the law. The 10th commandment concerns the intentions of the heart. With the ninth, it summarizes all the precepts of the law. So really, this 10th commandment can wrap up a lot of the other ones too. So it's a covetousness that also covers some of the other ones that we talked about, right?
For sure.
And it's a disorder. That's what the commandment says. It's a disorder of covetous desires. And there's a lot of things when we really think about it. I think this commandment, all of us probably have been guilty of it at one point or another when we see somebody else's life or circumstance and you think, oh, I wish I had that life. I wish I had that car. I wish I had that job. I wish I had that house, whatever it is, But at the end of the day, like you said, it's sinful, right? And we need to really think about and pray about that desire and be thankful for what God has given us at that moment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, I just think that like, I always remind people like, I mean, the one thing I find is like, funny is, especially when we break down this commandment is I think of Black Friday, the great ritual that comes right between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Black Friday shopping at like the malls or the outlets or whatever. And I'm just like, and I always remind people like, and of course, like, we always have this conversation. Like, we're saying like, why would everyone just want to go to these malls and like, just like act like a bunch of idiots, just the day after they were just like sitting around the table being thankful for what they have.
Right.
And next thing you know, they go out in force, worrying about the things they don't have.
No, that I never thought of that, but isn't that true? I mean, it's
Oh, sure.
really it's so true. And moving on with this catechism area that I'm looking at here, 2536 says that the 10th commandment forbids greed and the desire to amass earthly goods without limit. It
Hmm.
forbids avarice rising from a passion for riches and their attendant power. It also forbids the desire to commit injustice by harming our neighbor in his temporal goods. So when it comes down to it, when we think about earthly goods, the temptation is away from the spiritual and toward the temporal in an unhealthy way, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Because we lose that idea that that God provides for all of us, even if it's not in the ways that we want and at the time that we want it, right?
Hmm.
Um, and when we realize that, you know what, stop. I feel for my own life when I stop worrying about how God will provide for me, I can be the person that God made me to be to help other people, right? If I'm always thinking about the things I need and pray just only for myself and what my family and I need, then I think it's an unhealthy thing too. We need to also pray for other people's needs, right? Um, Nothing wrong with praying for ourselves, though, right? But it's that whole idea that we need to trust that God somehow, some way, He will provide for us, especially if it is some type of a material thing that we're praying for, if that makes sense.
For sure, yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, you mentioned greed actually,
Yes.
and it just like it makes me think of some of the wealthiest and most powerful people that we hear about one way or another on the news. And I'm just like wondering, like, what do they do with all that money they have? Like, do they honestly need it? And it's just like I'm just like, especially like, when people that were struggling, in the past year with the pandemic. I mean, thankfully we're starting to somewhat come out of it, but I think the repercussions of the past year are going to be felt one way or another for many of us. Especially, whether it's like on the professional or even like, even like for our like, you know, our our healthy well-being, so to speak. But I just always like to think, I always like get asked, like, I just hope that some of these CEOs or, rich and most powerful people in America, maybe start giving, most of their fortune to, um, like, some really noble causes like Habitat for Humanity, help enhance, the things like that, especially because let's face it, poverty's been on the rise, for the past year,
Yes.
especially considering, what happened with the pandemic. There were people that lost work. There are people that struggled to get, to find something to do. I mean, I know thankfully, good news is, things are starting to look better. But I mean, I don't think we're going to be back at 100%, anytime soon. But I mean, thankfully, maybe something will come around for everybody that, had nothing, after going from cloud nine to rock bottom, and hopefully they can start, rising up again like the phoenix.
Yeah, good points. And I'm glad you brought that up because we're in a unique time. And I think it's been a tragic time for so many. Here
Mhm.
we're taping this right now. Actually, this is a pre-recorded episode for the summer, June of 2021. We're taping it in the spring. But when we look at last year of 2020 with the pandemic, and we're coming out of that, right? I mean, which is a good thing. But certainly so many people have suffered. And this is a perfect time that when we look at this one commandment, is that when we pray against this whole idea of envy, and I'm going to read from the catechism because you said it is a capital sin, and that's exactly what the catechism says. 2539, it says that envy is a capital sin. It refers to the sadness at the sight of another's goods, and the immoderate desire to acquire them for oneself, even unjustly, when it wishes grave harm to a neighbor. It is a mortal sin. So I'm glad that you brought that up because really the heart of this commandment is envy. And envy is not a good thing. And
Not at all.
that's right. And when we go against envy, when we pray against it, we're praying for gentleness of heart and generosity, aren't we? And a generous heart toward others instead of wanting what is theirs for ourselves. And also, I think gratefulness for our own lives and what he provides for us helps to diminish envy in our heart. I don't know. Have you ever done like a list on a piece of paper or even, I don't know, on your phone or computer, a list of what you're grateful for?
I think I've done it once, and but I would like to make it a more frequent activity.
Yeah, I think it's good because it helps us not to be envious. When we think, my goodness, how good has God been to me? I mean, I don't know about you, but even when I think about the times that God has been there for me to protect me against things of the world and how things that happen in life and how he sustains us, it really helps us to not be envious, I believe. So, but this has been, these commandments, Mickey, I want to thank you that you have done this series with us. We're coming close to the end of the program, and we have done a total of 4 of these podcasts on Philly Nonnatus YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe. Just click on the subscribe button so that every time we do a new podcast, it'll pop up on your phone and remind you. This is our Families in Crisis podcast. And so I want to thank all of you listening. If you are one of those families who's gone through tough times, maybe it has to do with divorce or separation or annulment. Maybe it has to do with something else. Please do connect with us on our website at nonnatus.org and make your appointment for a free spiritual consultation. What we offer is pastoral and spiritual accompaniment for families in crisis. If you know somebody who's going through some kind of a challenge in their family or individually, please refer them to us, because that's what we do. We help people. We help them with their spiritual lives. We help them to be more connected with their faith. And, churches and pastors and archdioceses are very, 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 very busy. And what we do is the work that a lot of pastors and priests don't have time to do. And that's the time to listen to someone's problems, issues, and also just to be there for them. You can email us, you can text us. I'll give you that information. We're business hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. But when I say the director checks her emails and texts even off hours, I do. And so we'll get back to you as soon as we can if you have an issue that needs attending. But, generally speaking, we're business hours during the week. The email address is director.srnf@gmail.com. The cell number is 215-870-9913. Reach out to us at nonnatus.org. Mickey, do you have any final words before we end?
Some of the general things that I would just like to encourage I just want to encourage people to do is, if you are I'm not just saying this to the men, but I also like to say this to the women. Find some accountability if you're struggling to break addiction from pornography, if you're struggling to live a chaste life. Look at chastityproject.com. They have some excellent resources that may help you. The other thing too is, I would say stop feeding the music that promotes sexual promiscuity, and instead, stop it. I mean, as a matter of fact, I was still appalled at what happened at the Grammys. I think most of us are by now, especially, how Cardi B really presented herself. And this is, I think this podcast comes at a very good time too, and, the aftermath of what we saw. And you think, and of course, parents, and I just like to say this to the parents, you have a role. You're the first teachers in the household. I suggest you take own of it and make sure you teach the faith well to your children, and make sure that they understand what chastity is, and set a good example for them for what kind of a marriage that they should seek if they are called to that vocation.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And Mickey, being that you're a young adult, I think coming from you, especially because you've been in the trenches with people your age and seen what's going on out there, maybe more than someone my age is what I'm saying. So I do think that what you're saying here is wonderful and good. And we appreciate it, Mickey. Thank you. Wonderful advice. So again, I want to invite everybody to stay in touch with us, make that appointment for spiritual consultation with our Mercedarian friar, Father Ken Breen. He might even be on this podcast right now. So God bless everyone. Keep an eye on this podcast. It always premieres on the last Thursday of every month, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. God bless, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Did you enjoy this podcast? Listen to other podcasts from Patchwork Heart Ministry by following Patchwork Heart Radio wherever you listen to podcasts.